are literally shaping the planet.
Purpose is the only pathway to a regenerative future.
We have a choice to stay with the status quo or to change.
What is the point of trying to be just resilient when we can actually innovate?
As I start, I first want to say I hope that all of you and your friends, families, colleagues are doing well and are healthy and navigating the surreal environment we find ourselves in. Our company has experienced this in incredible ways. On one hand, we've had a lot of agility. Our teams have made decisions in days and deployed in weeks, things that frankly, before this pandemic would have taken months, even longer to debate and discuss. So we found this muscle where we can move quickly, make choices, and frankly, I've been incredibly proud of the agility of the whole team. Now, at the same time, we found areas where we thought we had robust and resilient processes, and we found that they were more brittle and fragile than we expected. And we've had to step back and really ask first principle questions about why we work the way we work. Is there a better way? We've asked a lot of what if questions. And that journey is continuing for us because it's unclear how all of this will unfold over the next few months. Now, a few themes that have come up that I think are a good starting off point for our conversation today. First, we've realized that a lot of the technology that we're using existed before. We just weren't using it to the available potential of the technology, right? Whether it's Teams, Zoom, video conferencing, collaboration channels like Slack, a lot of it was there. The scale at which we were using it, though, was different and limited. And the reason for that was a choice. The choice was in the business processes, in the choice people make, in how we view the system and how we stretch the realm of what's possible. So I think how we adapt as a team, as an organization, as a community, as an industry, is actually a greater barrier than the available technology. And then the last takeaway we had was that whether it's preparing in PPE and having masks for our factory workers and our service teams, whether it's making sure that we understood the connectivity available to all our personnel around the world, trying to react in a crisis is really a bad time. The time to prepare for a crisis is before you're in one. And I know that sounds obvious in retrospect, but now let's project to the future and think about things like climate change. Imagine the environment happening in California right now with the forest fires or the hurricane seasons we're getting in the Gulf Coast. We believe urbanization is going to continue. How do we create cities and infrastructure that can navigate the population growth and urbanization challenges while dealing with climate change? So now is the time to prepare for the next set of crises, because if anything, what we've found out is that when we have these system level events, our ability to respond isn't dependent on one company, but how we operate as a system and as an industry. Now look, some of these stats are not going to be new. I'm speaking to a group of people that are experts in this space. But one of the things we always come back to is almost 40% of the carbon emissions on the planet come from buildings. Data centers are one of the great polluters of our time, and they're working hard to get a lot more efficient. But it's not just data centers, right? The largest cities in the world, with perhaps the exception of parts of China and India, are old cities. Their infrastructure is old. And so there's a lot of inefficiency and waste coming out from how we heat and cool those environments. As temperature extremes become more the norm, that heating and cooling load becomes even higher. Now, all that cost and consumption is also coupled with a lot of waste. So 40% of the carbon emissions come from buildings, and 30% of the energy consumption in those buildings is waste. So you can see how this is adding up to sort of a real crisis for us to reimagine both in how we build, but also how we operate existing environments. This stat always makes me laugh because this was obviously pre-COVID. So 87% of our time was being spent indoors. I don't know about you, but it feels like it's almost approaching 100% now. And look, there's a lot of debate on what the return to normal or new normal is going to feel like. But what I can tell you is that there is no revert to sort of prior settings, right? There's no restore button here. So whatever path we take to get back will inevitably be different and not exactly the same pre the crisis, and different by country and by industry for sure. So I think there's been a clear architecture in place, a clear conversation. I think what this crisis has reminded us is speed is critical. Now, KP talked about this, and I think it's an interesting set of contradictions, right? We built the most resilient things that any industry builds. I completely agree with that. Yet at the same time, and some of these stats are specific to the US, but I think they're broadly true, this industry collectively is amongst the worst in terms of driving productivity. A lot of the costs and efficiencies are trapped in the handoffs between the different actors in the industry. And if you look at net productivity, it's sort of flatlined for almost 25 years. Now, I contend that a correlating driver to that is the fact that it's also one of the industries that has done the least to systemically take advantage of digital tools. By external measures, it ranks almost last in a list of 22 industries in terms of industries that have digitized. And so there's a lot of pressure on a small pool of available resources while a lot of the waste is trapped in the system. That digital disruption is something that I think this community is all about. A lot of the startups, a lot of the software companies that are in this community are trying to solve those problems. And I think that is one of the most critical areas to invest in and to unlock in terms of how we operate. BIM adoption is a critical component where we can use technology to prevent rework. This is also important because a lot of this industry is facing an aging workforce, both in the design environment and especially in the operate and maintain environment. So how do we make sure that we can use technology to create a competency that we can survive as the workforce and the experience that are transitions? Business model innovation. WeWork and Airbnb have talked about space and physical space as a service. And look, any business model will go through creative disruption. Yes, WeWork's model got ahead of itself and it'll readjust and find a new normal. But I think there is a move towards this idea that our historical perspective of how space is built and consumed is going to change. And I think that's an important idea. And I think there is more business model innovation to come, because I think that will allow us to unlock value in a more efficient way than we've done historically. More and more standards are being built. Modular construction is terribly exciting, and I think if you haven't spent time digging into the speed and efficiency that affords us, I think it's an incredible area. Similarly, there's standards across the operate life cycle that are important. And lastly, I think there's an opportunity for us to continue to invest in ways to share how technology can affect outcomes, right? So the use of software and AI to create predictive as well as reactive closed loop systems in operating environments is key. Now, if you step back, those are the things we can do from an industry standpoint, but the broader environment we're operating in has 4 integrations that we think matter. And selfishly, at Schneider Electric, we have put all our eggs in this basket. And we believe these 4 integrations are the core, and so our investment strategies, the companies we invest in, the companies we look to participate with are around these 4 integration points. The first is energy and automation. When you think about factory environments, logistics environments, warehouses, the notion of the silo, the mechanical and the electrical is breaking down. It needs to be a system that works together. Second, our endpoint capability, what we measure on premise and what we can do in the cloud, work together in a cyber-secure way. The conjunction between build and design and operate and maintain, 2 worlds that have historically not collaborated as effectively and on the same platform, I think is an incredible opportunity. And the difference in site-by-site choices and integrated enterprise choices. So these 4 integrations we think are going to transform the industry. And the more simplification we can drive here, the more scale we can get. So what perspective do we bring to this? Schneider Electric is a leader in energy management and industrial automation. But we spend a lot of time thinking about the mission of our customers, right? So whether it's T-Mobile Arena, which we're a proud sponsor of, that goes from hosting a hockey game with the Vegas Knights, and then the next day hosting a conference with 20,000 people, how the building physically adapts and prepares and does that in a seamless way is a big part of the solution sets we provide. Boston Scientific does a lot in R&D, and how do we enable collaboration between scientists and labs and share information in an effective way, especially when some of those labs have incredibly intense uptime, temperature, and humidity requirements. UPS, all of us have been living off e-commerce and the whole mechanical network that supports it has been under strain, but has held up. The ability to scale up and scale down and respond to that demand are some of the challenges UPS is working on. Where Top Guns are trained, and at Miramar, we have provided one of the largest microgrid solutions that the Air Force is using, and that makes a lot of the consumption of energy at that base self-sustaining. And then lastly, outside of a data center, probably the building that has the most points of data consumption, from cameras to tracking of how people move to entertainment, is a casino. And we're proud partners with MGM and their properties to create the best guest experience, but also reduce the energy costs and the operating costs of those environments. So those are some of the perspectives, amongst others, that we're bringing to sort of this point of view. The other thing I'll say as I get into the next part of this is, whether it's this perspective or another, that's open for debate. Frankly, we know we don't have this right, and we know through conversations like this we'll continue to evolve our perspective. I think the main thing we're insisting on is the way we've historically done things doesn't survive, and we have to sort of accelerate as an industry the pace of change and the adoption of new tools. Now, when we think about this from that life cycle standpoint I mentioned, and you look at the design phase, the build phase, and the operate and maintain phase, this is sort of an architecture that we propose when we talk to our customers and partners. It starts at the very bottom with connected products. I don't think you can build in an environment in 2020 and not have an IoT strategy. An IoT strategy is not some philosophical point of view. It's practical starting points where you can get energy information, mechanical performance information, asset tracking information from your deployed environment. So we have to use products that are connected and that can communicate. Then those products, as they communicate, will have a layer of local edge control. This is behind your firewall. It's generally at your site, and it allows for mobile analytics available to the facilities team, the operating team at that site, and allows us for logging and historian capability for those assets. Then in the third layer is where the software differentiation really starts kicking in. And this is a space that we believe is abstracted from the hardware layer. And so a lot of the software startups on this call and this forum can play and need to play in a greater space in this environment. From our perspective, we have tools that help with the design phase, and I'll touch on that. We recently had the opportunity to acquire RIB, and that capability is very exciting, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we have a series of analytics advisors that take all that data that these IoT devices are producing and create insight for our customers. So let's walk through that journey. On the design phase, one of the things that I find interesting is that 40% of the operational efficiency through the life cycle of the building actually started the design phase. And if we could have a better closed loop mechanism between everyone who's operating a facility, a healthcare facility, a bank, an office, a data center, and bring that back to the people helping design it and close that loop in real time, imagine the efficiencies we could gain. Imagine if we could create anonymized data sets that allow the next hospital to learn from every other hospital that had been built before it. Today, a lot of those efficiencies are repeated because we have no mechanism for that closed loop learning. A lot of the cost savings that the best in class, and the best in class still have plenty of room to improve, but they can drive almost double-digit cost savings from deploying those best practices. And then broadly speaking, only about half of the deployed environment is using BIM technology. So again, even on the basic entry point, there's a lot of upside and opportunity. Our perspective on this starts with creating tools that allow in the design phase for the repeatable work to be taken away and the human creativity to be focused on the problems that are specific to the application. So things like, what does a standard product layout look like? How does it work in a three-dimensional environment? How does space utilization work? Are there standards for how infrastructure on the electrical side or mechanical side can be designed? So into solving that problem, we work with some of our partners like AECOM and Root, and we developed a platform that we call Layout Fast. And all it does is take our product set, take three-dimensional information, natively plug into Autodesk in their Revit environment, and allow for the repeatable work of laying out an electrical room to get a lot more seamless. And by creating templates and by creating standards, design firms, electrical contractors, general contractors can take a lot of that wasted energy that is done in repeatable work and take a lot of the errors that come in that and eliminate them. Today, we have about 6,000 users on this platform. And while it's one mechanism, and working with Autodesk, we hope to create an environment that allows for more of a heterogeneous mechanism, the goal is to try and make sure that we can bring scalability and learning into these platforms. Also imagine a new design engineer. Electrical engineer graduates, comes into a new design firm. Imagine the capability where there's an entire library of architectures that are validated and tested available to that engineer. How could that help us scale the productivity in this industry? Now, let's take a look at the build phase. And again, I'm giving you vignettes. Obviously, we could spend a lot of time going much deeper into any one of these areas. Almost all the data, right? It says 95.5. I'm not sure how Xperia Group got that precise, but let's just say most, if not all of the data in the engineering construction phase is not captured effectively. There's still a lot of manual interventions. There's no singular platforms with which to share information. There is very little, by executives' own acknowledgement, use of standard integrated project management software. And this is the part that gets me. We spend all our time as a value chain debating and almost stressing each other out about the CapEx environment, yet 35% of our cost is wasted because we don't share information effectively enough. On top of that, as you'll hear in the operate phase, most of the capital is actually deployed over the life cycle in the OpEx environment. Now, the CapEx environment gets all the attention because that's what we can measure more effectively. So let's look at what happens in this construction phase. One of the ideas that has existed for a long time in the industrial automation world is this idea of building digital twins. The process industries in oil and gas have had this for a long time. Water, wastewater industries have had this for a long time. And you create a model of your system, and that allows you to operate and optimize. But more importantly, what you're designing, what you're building, and what you're operating is connected through that digital twin. That digital twin lives in each one of those phases. And so in those handoffs, it helps bridge the gaps between the different entities and owners at each stage. RAB was built to help with that collaborative problem. It's an incredible company. We're proud to have them in the Schneider portfolio. They have over 500,000 users today. And their M2 platform is one of the standards that helps drive efficiency in that construction environment. We're going to see a lot more integration of that here in the US, and we think there's an incredible opportunity for similar platforms, again, to help with this bridging solution and introduce digital twins into the built environment in a more pervasive way. You then come to the operate stage, and one headline I'd like you to take away, remember, 40% of the carbon emissions comes from buildings. 30% of the energy in buildings is wasted. And add to that the fact that 80% of the energy savings in most buildings is still untapped, right? And look, let's assume these numbers are wildly wrong. There's still an incredible upside opportunity for us to engage in this differently, right? So whether it's 80% or 70% doesn't change the equation. The fact is we have a lot of upside that collectively we can go after, but we have to approach the problem differently. One of the things we think about when we think about any environment, whether it's an existing building that's 100 years old in New York or Chicago, or whether it's a brand new construction in Atlanta, we think about the different stakeholders that come into that, right? So the environment's been constructed, it's been handed over, yet there's no single entity that owns it. Yes, the facilities team has a point of view. The people trying to sell occupancy have a point of view. The people trying to secure it and make it safe and make it healthy, which is even more pertinent right now, have a point of view. People trying to keep it connected have a point of view. And then the users in it have to work through and make sure it's an effective space for them to operate in. So I think to understand the total system, we have to understand all the stakeholders in the system. And too often we look at this from a subsystem standpoint. So the ability to understand granularity and understand the superset is incredibly important. Now, the way we think about it is when you take those connected devices, and again, this is our perspective, there are different ways to solve these problems. After the edge control, there's a layer of analytics that matters. So imagine that your HVAC systems, your power systems, and by the way, in our case, we believe in open environments. So this will work not just in a Schneider deployed environment, but in a heterogeneous environment. And similarly, we're making our hardware open. So if the analytics layer sitting on top of it is a new piece of software developed by somebody else, there's interoperability. I think that's the only way as an industry we get to the outcomes we want. But let me just take one example. Take Workplace Advisor. So this is a cloud-based solution. We have the ability to capture data from different systems. And we have a service bureau where people working with AI are looking and analyzing and offering insight to customers across different platforms. Workplace Advisor is particularly topical because it looks at things like monitoring the environment inside your office space. Now, before COVID, we thought there were incredible use cases. One of the use cases, we were working with a CHRO, and HR leaders are not generally ones you spend a lot of time talking about, but we were talking to a CHRO about this, was how to enable collaboration in a new office. This Fortune 500 company was moving to a new office space, and they wanted to create a solution where they could use badge data and enable collaboration. So for example, if their design team and their supply chain team were working on a particularly difficult problem and they wanted to make sure they were working together, then they could architect so that Monday morning when people badged in, they were assigned a desk in the open space plan, they would be sitting closer together. And then the next day, the supply chain team and design team had figured it out, but the sales team had to work more effectively with accounting, and they could, again, facilitate those outcomes. So those small nudges, as Laszlo Block at Humu and Google likes to talk about, would create this environment that would actually make the building work to facilitate the outcome of collaboration. We thought that was an incredibly interesting and remains an incredibly interesting use case. Post-COVID, we've adapted, and the big things we're solving for are safe distancing. Who's in the office? What is the density of utilization? Who was where when, and how do we enable track and trace? Can we integrate thermal cameras and do persistent temperature checks, which, while insufficient, are a start? Can we make sure that we monitor air quality? We know air quality is a big driver in keeping buildings safe. So as we come back to return to work and making offices safe, software has a big role to play, and Workplace Advisor is one example of that capability set. Now, I want to spend a moment on this slide because I said to you at the start that what we learned in our company is that the technology existed. And again, we've given you a flavor of the technology we're investing in, but frankly, the technology that exists in all the people listening into this forum far exceeds the capability we're describing. The limitation, however, is not technology. The limitation is a commitment to change and a different process and view and measurement system from all the actors in this value chain. The end users obviously have a perspective to play, right? Too often we give the owner and end user sort of the burden to say, well, if they would just think of the bigger picture in the life cycle, we could do different things in the CapEx phase. Remember, the OpEx cost structure is at least 5 times greater than the CapEx cost structure. But I also think that every other component, every other actor in this value chain has a role to play to think about the purpose and the outcome. Sustainability and how we build for sustainability is a choice. And at minimum, what we can all start doing is make sure that we educate the industry to say, look, there are two paths to take. We're at a crossroads, and there's a path that is more sustainable, that is a path that is more efficient, there is a path that is more scalable, and there is a path that is perhaps cheaper in the short term, but much more expensive, both financially and in environmental costs in the long term. And having the courage to educate about those choices, having the courage to change, not when we're forced to like we were in COVID, but because we know now is the time to prepare for the crisis ahead. I think that's the responsibility everyone in this community has. And that's why I think, forums like this are so powerful, because it drives that change in them. We believe in doing this with partners. We have a large number of developers we work with, companies we share with. Obviously, the technology stack, like I've mentioned, you can recognize the players here, and we're privileged to work with them. And like I said, we believe in open technology, and I'll come back to how you can participate in that in a minute. Like KP, we believe in investing, perhaps not, we're not as skeptical about the ability of large corporates to innovate that he is, but I absolutely agree with the idea of the unencumbered mission that a startup has. And we were always deeply impressed by that focus and that desire to create something and build something. And working with partners like KP, we have created our own venture fund as well. We have very specific areas we're looking to invest in, but you can reach out to us with the information at the bottom there. And again, we'll work through the shadow ventures as well to find right areas where we can invest. We think this is an important avenue of creation, and we believe tapping into that environment is critical. So again, we look forward to hearing from all of you where you think it might make sense. And then lastly, we talked about those data sets, and not every software company is going to build devices, and frankly, hardware is difficult, and so I would encourage you to avoid that if you can. But the data sets that we're creating, whether it's a drive, power monitoring piece of equipment, an HVAC control, a electrical cabinet, all of that is communicating and creating data sets, and those data sets are specific to applications. The electrical signature in a data center is different from a healthcare environment. It's different yet from indoor agriculture. So what if we could take those data sets, anonymize them, and then make them available to a community with software development kits and APIs to start creating applications that would help with the purpose of the building? Well, that's exactly what we're doing with Schneider Electric Exchange. So we've created an environment where all the data that our connected devices are producing is available. And through protocols, you can come in, access that data, and start building either private applications, so enterprises are doing this for their own internal consumption, or you can make applications that you then sell in the digital marketplace because you're solving a problem that is universally known and you're using the data sets that we're providing to help do that. Again, it's an early beginning to this idea that this has to be a collaborative motion, but it's our contribution to making sure that we remain open and the data we're creating is available for everyone to innovate with. So look, let me wrap up with just a few examples, and I'll give you three. First is PenMed. So we had the privilege of working with PenMed, which actually ramped and accelerated the finishing of this wing because of the COVID crisis. But they had invested $1.5 billion in capital, 1.5 million square feet for a new state-of-the-art, and in their words, future-proof building environment. We had the opportunity to work with them from everything from patient experience to practitioner experience, their IoT strategy, the air quality strategy. And in doing that, when we finished, when we built this hospital that we think is a benchmark for what future-ready hospitals are, we actually ended up at a lower CapEx budget than they started out imagining, because we were able to find efficiencies and integrations because we were looking at that holistic mechanism that allowed them to deliver on time, in fact, faster and at a lower budget while having this connectivity built in. And PenMed is one of those customers that has graciously agreed to talk to customers and partners about this, so we're happy to connect you if you're interested. The other example is United Therapeutics. United Therapeutics started with a simple goal. They wanted to build a building that would consume that would produce more energy than it consumes. They've gotten to the net zero point, but now their goal is to be a net exporter of energy from this environment. And they really came at this from every possible angle. They're using geothermal energy, they're doing rainwater harvesting, they're obviously using solar energy. And our advisor solutions work not just with our technology, but a lot of third-party solutions. We don't make lighting controls or window shade systems. They were using third-party solutions that we were integrating into a single control system. And that allows them to continue to push the boundaries of the sustainability of this building beyond net zero to be a net exporter of energy. And the last is the home of the Fighting Irish. We worked with Notre Dame, and Cisco actually is a key partner. As Cisco was building a new IP backbone, 95 buildings on the campus are under this single operational architecture. And in terms of the safe reopening and return to campus, this has been a big part of the solution in real time. But they've also substantially reduced their energy costs across the campus by almost 20%. Now look, that has a sustainability outcome, which is very important to the trustees, the university, and the students, but is an incredibly important financial outcome, especially in this environment where the finances of university systems are under pressure. So again, a great partnership and working very closely with Cisco in that example. I'll close with just this call to action and echo what KP had said. I think we have an opportunity to learn from this crisis and prepare for the next one. The industry has incredible upside. It's one of the industries that digital transformation has not been pervasively impacted yet. And I think it's inevitable, and I think we have a choice. And the choice is to stay with the status quo or to change. I'm committed to that change. I think that change is necessary for the planet. I think that change is necessary for us to continue to build in a more responsible and resilient way. And it's terribly exciting to be part of a community like this that shares those values. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you have a great conference over the next 2 days, and I look forward to learning from all of you.